Good morning, everybody. My name is Benjamin Brooks. I am the Director of Programs and Visual Communications for the Chicago Council on Science and Technology. Thank you very much for coming to our very first breakfast program. It's a big success with the turnout that we've had. I'd like to introduce Dr. Alan Schriesheim, Director Emeritus of Argonne's National Laboratory and President of the Chicago Council on Science and Technology. He'll introduce Howard, and we'll get on with the program. I did want to remind everybody that tours will be taking place after Howard's presentation, and if you are interested in a tour of the facility, please make your way to the back of the room. Thank you very much. Alan.
Thank you, Ben, and it's a pleasure to see so many people who get up early in the morning for bagels and cream cheese. I'm president, but I don't have enough clout to have lox and bagels and cream cheese, tomatoes and onions and so forth. Capers. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce Howard Tullman, who I'm sure, as the saying goes, needs no introduction. But Howard is the president and CEO of Tribeca Flashpoint Media Arts Academy. He's also general managing partner for the Chicago High-Tech Investors, a member of Mayor Emanuel's Council of Technology Advisors and Governor Quinn's Illinois Innovation Council. He is an advisor on many businesses, adjunct professor at the Kellogg Graduate School of Management, and in the past 40 years, in addition to founding more than a dozen high-tech companies, creating thousands of new jobs, training dozens of talented managers who've gone on to lead their own ventures, Howard has created, developed, achieved liquidity in excess of $1 billion for a number of his businesses, including CCC Information Services, Imagination Pilots, Coin Dealer Services, Tunes.com, Worldwide Exceed Group, and the Cobalt Group. Howard has also worked as a business partner with Microsoft for more than 30 years, so an extremely accomplished individual, and I'm really delighted that the Chicago Council on Science and Technology is hosting this morning event. So that's all the introduction you're going to get from me, Howard.
Thank you. So if anybody wants to move forward, there's it's easier to see. I see some of you guys are behind the cameras. Why don't you come on up front? Somebody asked if this was a list of our sponsors. It's actually a list of the URLs that I'll be talking about during the presentation, so you don't have to try to write them all down. So let me begin by just welcoming you all and talking just briefly about some themes that I want to cover in the course of the talk. First is this idea of how rapidly the web is operating these days and how quickly both iteration occurs, but also how quickly any new business that's launched is knocked off, duplicated, supplemented, changed in a million different ways. So we call that fast followers, but one of the other very interesting things about this whole process is that it turns out that brand, which used to be a validating aspect of everything and also a lot of protection, is virtually useless these days relative to the speed that people are jumping into the markets and deploying and constantly iterating what's going on. We're seeing a lot about pricing. We're seeing, Groupon and all these different organizations. But what's really more interesting is how we're going to recapture scraps of time and how wiki work, the idea that we can distribute work throughout the world in micro little units, is going to change the way we become more productive, and that we recapture, as an example, stay-at-home moms, commuters, all kinds of groups of people who basically can now be sort of put back to work in these micro increments of time. Gaming is driving really everything, the badgification of the web, this idea that reward systems are being developed with accomplishments and measurements and things. They're changing behaviors in ways we never understood They didn't even enter into these calculations previously. Context, the context in which information is being delivered today, more important than the information itself. If you hit me at the wrong time, it doesn't matter what the information is, frankly. So this idea that location and the context of delivery of information is critical is, again, a growing aspect of what's going on, and also that so much more of what we do will be location-based for a variety of reasons related to the technology as well. The other thing that's really interesting is that content used to be a placeholder, used to be a way that we could represent the audiences of the consumers of that content. Now we know who those people are, and so content isn't shorthand anymore. It's not essential. It's not going to be an organizing principle going forward because so much of this is going to be variable based on every single individual. And then lastly, location is really the next dimension. Places will talk to us. They'll know we're present. They'll be able to supply us information in the context of being in those locations. All of this is going to really change the way we interact with our world. So I like to start by just suggesting something that seems fairly obvious, but it's astonishing how many people don't really understand this sea change that occurred when Facebook came around. But basically the web, the original web, was all about links and information and anonymity. And with the advent of Facebook, really the first place that required that you actually be who you are, we changed from a information web to a social web. And that's sort of the largest single change that's occurred in the last, let's say, decade. And when we talk about the social graph, the next increment to the social graph is actually going to be the interest graph, and we'll talk about that as well. But it turns out that you actually have to be now who you are on the web. You can't be a dog or a cat, actually. And services are coming up that are actually going to validate and sort of authenticate who people are. LinkedIn will be one of these sources. Actually, the government's about to sort of, bless LinkedIn as the unifying sort of business-to-business identification system. But even old-timers like YouTube are starting to offer new opportunities. It used to be that it wasn't material to YouTube to know who you were. But now if you go to YouTube, one of the options that increasingly is going to be offered is tell me who you are and start using your real name and things like that. So that's a change. There are services that are growing up now that are validators in a different way. So just as Underwriters Laboratory validated technology of old, now there are people vouching for the nature of sites, whether they're legitimate sites, whether the commerce is high quality, all of these kinds of things. This is an interesting site. If you haven't gone to Terms of Service, it's really interesting. They specialize in sort of explaining to you what you claimed you read. Of course, none of us read it, right? We all just checked that box and said, oh yeah, I read and I agree to all this stuff. God forbid you should ever look at what you agree to. So that's what they do, and they're sort of in the process of publishing that in order to shame these sites into doing a better job of making it clear to us what the trade-offs are that we're making, because we don't really know what these trade-offs are. And so Terms of Service is a very interesting new kind of group. What's happening next? Well, what's happening next is another set of negotiations. This is AppNet, and basically they're saying, we'll give you a social network without ads. Okay? This is Amazon, and so what Amazon is saying is, I subsidized your Kindle because I'm going to show you ads, but for $20 you can back out. You can have a ad-free program if you pay me the subsidy back. So it's an interesting thing, and more people are starting to understand that these are bargains that turn out to be not such a great bargain. And then next you'll see in just about a month that Microsoft is making a big step in this regard. Usually the default state of most of these technologies is in favor of sort of openness and access. When Microsoft launches the next version of the browser, however, the default state will be do not track. And you'll have to sort of invite cookies in and invite tracking and all of this stuff in. So that's a pretty big step for Microsoft, which obviously is as ad-driven as anybody else is, to make a commitment to sort of enhance privacy for a lot of us who never look at all of those kinds of specifications and details. So here's the social web. You know, we've got 1 million people out there every single minute, and if you're not talking about your business, they certainly are. And so it's really essential to start to understand how there's another party in the room. It's not simply you and your marketing team or your organization. Gripe sites continue to jump up. There are apps that permit you to quickly gripe about just about anything you're interested in. And, you know, the influence of what's going on is so critical. We run the Tribeca Film Festival. One of the interesting issues is while a film is actually screening, should we encourage people to tweet about it, or should we tell them, please don't? Well, theaters are actually now setting aside some seats for the Twitter users, because it turns out that you can't avoid it anyway, and so segregating them and letting them actually promote these movies and films turns out to be something that at least some of the theater chains have decided to do. I'm going to show you next a crucial application, one that I recommend for all of you. I guarantee you almost none of the people here have ever seen it, but it's called RunPee, and it does an amazing thing. It tells you when during the movie it's great to run out and pee. Okay? And it also tells you what you missed, right? So here's the time to go, and if you were concerned about what was going on, here's what you missed, all right? So these are the power of the new kinds of connectivity. All right, so 5 areas very quickly. First, this idea of personalization. We have no idea of how substantial a change personalization is making in all of our lives, and how much we can now address populations and reach people and present information to them in cost-effective and very immediate ways. This is roughly the 57 different attributes that Google grabs every time you do a Google search. And, you know, basically what we're heading into is a period where, frankly, the most valuable asset out there is this personal data. And it's going to increasingly drive attacks sort of on privacy, increasingly invade sort of every aspect of what's going on. And it's, you know, it's problematic in a lot of respects. To give you an idea of how pervasive it is, there are about 7 billion people in the world. There are about 3 billion searches on Google now every day. And Google is doing a pretty decent job. They continue to enhance search. They've added the knowledge graph now, which tries to make search more and more valuable and useful and particular to you. But interestingly enough, the newer focus is on sites like Chango. And what they do, and the reason they do this is really interesting. It turns out that if you're constantly trying to get ahead of the pack, you would like to know what people are looking for, because if you wait till they find it, you may be too late. And so the idea of mapping people's interests is where we're headed. It's not enough to just know your particulars. We actually need to know, what are you paying attention to, what are you looking into, and what the focus is. And the reason for that is because, as much as I love data, the truth is that if you're focusing on data and following activity, you're always behind the curve. You're not playing in terms of the anticipation market. You're sort of reacting afterwards. So we think of this as sort of a head and shoulders world. You know, you only have one chance to make a first impression. And the sooner you are, the faster you are. And this, of course, is going on in the financial trading markets, where you have these micro-speed transactions. But amazingly, Google isn't winning. Facebook is clearly and continues to sort of dominate utilization on the web, traffic on the web, advertising volume on the web, all of this stuff. And because it's sort of a winner-take-all world, as you start to increasingly draw share, it accelerates. And so now I would say that by the end of the year, for sure, we'll see Facebook announcing over 1 billion users. But they're unbelievably smart, because they don't simply aggregate this information. They've done a great deal of what they would call social design. And you know what this is. This is this little blue box that says connect with Facebook. And it absolutely is as psychological a tool as it is a technical tool, because it says we're lazy. Okay? And the prospect that we want to go to a new site and re-enter this information that we've entered 4 million times on the web already is 0. Okay, so if you can give me a button that says, I'll grab all that information for you, and I'll populate this new thing and sign you in and validate you, not only is it compelling, but it's also a tool that has enabled hundreds and millions of businesses to get out of a lot of the parts of the sort of web that are messy and sort of sticky aspects of the web. So businesses have adopted the Facebook Connect interface to an astonishing extent. In fact, now more than 9 million applications use Facebook Connect. And when I talked to you before about sort of getting ahead of the curve, the reason Facebook bought Instagram for $1 billion is right here. It's because they have a crystal ball. They can see what is going on across the entire universe of the web. They can see how quickly applications are gaining traction because every one of these things is running now through Facebook. So the idea of the open graph, 1 billion pieces of content shared through the open graph system every single day. Every time somebody newly enters this marketplace, they say, they obviously have a choice, but the lion's share of these people are saying, I'm going to use Facebook Connect, of course. I don't want to worry about users, authentication, identification, all this stuff. I put 2 lines of code in and I'm done. And so it's very compelling, and they keep getting smarter about this. This is just one example of Facebook integration. Okay, this is Ticketmaster. Now, Ticketmaster is pretty cool, but how cool is Ticketmaster when it tells you where your friends are sitting? Okay, where your Facebook friends are sitting. So now it not only tells them that you're going and that they are going, but where are they sitting? Now, you may not want your family to know, so you can actually restrict it to just your friends, not necessarily everyone. But this is driving increased attraction, interaction, commerce. It's the whole 9 yards, and it's just one of these sort of integrations. This is what Facebook knew about us in 2005. This is 2010. This is now. There's virtually nothing they don't know about us in terms of information. And why? Because increasingly we're willing to share that information because it saves us time and money, and it's a very powerful sort of attraction. And it's a calculation. This is essentially what Facebook is now collecting on all of us. And the calculation goes very simply. If you figure out reasons to save me time or money or make me more productive, then it's a good trade, and it's something that I'm willing to do. So here's an example of the next generation of how clever the Facebook guys are. You're all familiar sort of with this top box which says allow connection through Facebook Connect or don't allow it. That's how the world used to work. But that wasn't enough for Facebook, okay? Because the idea that you had a choice is really offensive to Facebook, okay? So instead, this button now has been changed, okay? So here's the new button. It just says play the game, okay? It doesn't say I don't want to play the game. It says play the game. In fact, it's sort of hard to back out of this thing. And so this is one of the ways that they just sort of rely on inertia and laziness and everything else to constantly having us opt in to providing more and more information. And the target right now is that more than 90% of us, and you can have grandparents, you can have all kinds of people saying, I'll never participate in this. And then they discover that their grandkids want to reach them on Skype, or their grandkids want to communicate with them in different ways. And lo and behold, eventually everybody gets into this process. And this is even without taking into account the impact of medical information and financial information. Because as those mission critical pieces of data start to be connected to this profile, this personal profile that you'll have, you really won't have any choice. You won't be walking around with cash. You won't be walking around with credit cards. God forbid you're in an accident. Do you think you don't want to have the paramedic have instant access to your allergies and your different kinds of medical histories? Of course you do. And so all of that is part of this sort of seductive invitation to share more and more information. Now, if you're good at this, you build these equations very clearly so that the customer understands exactly what they're bargaining for and why they're doing this. And so the best of the companies have done a really great job of figuring out how to develop these kinds of incentives. More verbs are on the way from Facebook. These are a couple. But the real critical verb is want, and want is coming down the line, okay? I mean, how cool is it if I tell you not only who I am and everything I'm interested in, but what I want? I mean, from a marketer's perspective, could it be any better than that? And so Facebook is constantly adding and enhancing. Timeline is another way. It's a very seductive suggestion. Here's a timeline. Give me all this information, not simply the current information, but all this historical information. And don't have your timeline look completely empty because it's sort of embarrassing if you do that. Marketplace is a new tool of Facebook's as well. Marketplace is driven to permit you to do local shopping. And local shopping means that they know who you are, they know where you are, they know what your interests are, they know and can provide you with the commerce kind of transactions, and they've even created Facebook credits, which is a currency system. So they've done it all, and it's, again, amazing. This is the next generation of that sort of revelation that eBay was when we could shop anywhere in the world. Now you can shop right down the street, and it turns out that's even more compelling because so much of commerce is local in very many respects. So why is Facebook clearly winning relative to Google? You know, my sort of simple analysis is that Google was built by engineers. It's an algorithmic formula. It looks backwards at what you looked for, and it projects what you might be interested in as a result of that. And Facebook instead has a much easier job. It has all this information that you've already willingly supplied. So I think of sort of Google as a rearview mirror and Facebook as a sniper scope. You know, very precise, highly targeted marketing where you're expressing exactly your needs, your desires, your wants, and all of that is now available to marketers in a very serious way. You've probably all heard about Pinterest. So when I talk about the interest graph as the next generation beyond the social graph, the interest graph is a system that's saying, tell me what you're interested in for a lot of different reasons. And Pinterest is growing a ridiculous amount and at tremendous speeds. It's also been captured very much by marketers, and so a ton of what's on Pinterest is actually commercial marketers, you know, putting stuff on there. But having said that, there's no question that this is the truth, that if you tell me what you pay attention to, I can define you. And I can define you from a commerce standpoint and a lot of other ways as well. So your interests are even more important than sort of your personal psychographics and demographics are, because those are a given now. Those are sort of table stakes. So if I already know this about you, what do I next need to know? I need to know what you're interested in. Zappos is a pretty smart company. They basically are saying, we can drive recommendations based on going and mining Pinterest so we know what your people are interested in, and we can extract from that what products within our universe would be valuable and important to these people. Pinterest has just ripped it up. It's now ahead of Google Plus in a very, very short period of time. But here's the most important thing. It's not simply that they've added users. It's that the web today is not about eyeballs. It's not about sheer volume. It's about engagement. And so look at the time that's being spent. People are spending 60 to 90 minutes on average on Pinterest, you know, doing this sort of digital scrapbooking. And on Google, under the best of circumstances, they're looking at a bunch of random things and jumping from video to video, but there's no sort of retention. There's no substantial commitment in terms of time. So Learnist is very interesting for educators. You know, I think of it as sort of Pinterest for educators. If you haven't looked at these kinds of sites, these are the next generation teachers, flipped classroom. All of these kinds of educators now are increasingly finding these kind of tools that let you construct essentially guided tours of the web, lets you aggregate information. Another great one is Open Tapestry. It's very, very easy. It has educational foundations built into it by subject matter. It lets you aggregate information by just flying around the web and tapping anything you want, and it'll pull it together. It can be photos, it can be videos, it can be information. Very powerful learning tools. All open source, all basically free. Tumblr is another one of these sort of interest aggregation sites. It's really coming back. It sort of came and went, but the idea is very simple. If you're not where the people are that you're interested in and that you're targeting, you're nowhere, basically. And so the sites that permit this kind of analysis are the sites that are really going to continue to sort of grow and expand in the social web. So it's hard to figure out a place for Google+. It's really interesting. Facebook will for sure be the personal descriptor system. LinkedIn will for sure be the tools used for business-to-business communication. And Twitter has a pretty good sort of franchise on current information. But it's hard to know how many more of these things we're going to sign up for and take time to sort of deal with. It just doesn't seem like there's a place for 3 more players in this. And if you look at that discrepancy, 405 minutes on Facebook and 3 minutes on Google+, it's pretty astonishing. When you focus this down, we did the artwork for Tyra Banks' new book. That may sound like an oxymoron to you. It's worse than that. It's actually so. But anyway, so she has 3.3 million followers on Twitter, and if you use that to send a directed video to her fans, you get some pretty amazing results. Number 1 on Barnes & Noble, number 2 on Amazon in the first week of launch. A virtually unreadable book. Okay. But what did the kids know, right? I mean, they just think she's the top model. So that's how that works. And there's 2 more. It's a series, so stand by. Anyway, so what's 80% plus? 80% plus is today the likelihood that Facebook can go through its system and accurately predict which 2 people will change their status to dating. Okay? This is what they tell us they know. God forbid they actually revealed what they truly know and the kinds of information and behavioral characteristics they're gathering. But this is the degree of precision of this kind of information. And we're going to see it everywhere. We're going to see personalized campaigns where the politician can, in a mass customized way, tell every single voter exactly what that voter wants to hear. We're seeing it already in terms of ways of getting around the fact that the federal government has restricted a lot of decision making based on financial credit information. Here's what they're doing. They're using all this other information about your shopping habits and your shopping activity and the volume that the government has yet to clamp down on to build different kinds of targeting tools to accomplish the same thing. This group alone has 110 million consumers in their base. We're going to see it in the way the web reacts to us. This was just recently disclosed. Very interesting. It turns out that Orbit sends different information to consumers based on what their hardware is. And Orbit's concluded that if you had a Mac, you were 40% more likely to book a 4 or 5-star hotel, so that's what they send the Mac users. You know, shame on you if you're still using a PC, okay? But think about this. You put in an inquiry, you think you're getting objective information, you think that you've done a search. People have no idea of the fact that none of this is objective anymore. None of this is what you think you're getting as a product of what you thought was a mechanical process. It's not. Safeway, nationwide, totally customized pricing so that as individual people are shopping, they're literally using all of this big data to price products based on what you've bought. Now, here's an interesting thing. If they know you're a buyer, you don't get the cheaper price. Okay? They figure they've got you already. So they do sort of conquest marketing. What they'll lower the price on is stuff where you don't have a significant acquisition history. So it's the reverse of what you would think, because we're sort of like, oh, frequent flyer, frequent user, I'll get a discount coupon. They're looking to expand share. And to expand share, you don't focus on your existing population. You focus on the people that you can add to the pie. All of this being driven by these huge aggregations of data, amazing amounts of information being captured, and high velocity is the phrase. High velocity is what permits instantaneous trading, what permits us to supply in real time variable information that we don't think is variable. We don't understand that all this stuff is being changed right before our eyes, but that's what's going on. So from a privacy standpoint, can you go too far? This quote up here is a Google quote from Eric Schmidt. It could have been the Gestapo that had this quote. It could have been 1984. A lot of different authors for this possible quote. But it's really more problematic than that, because education and learning is about serendipitous discovery. Okay, if we know only what we know, and if we're only being fed back what we already know, then basically we're not going to learn anything. We're not going to learn anything new. This is why we look at the newspaper and end up reading an article about African earthworms or something like that, or why we go to a bookstore and look for random books and sort of get attracted to books that we wouldn't ever search for. And so the idea that the filtering of personalization continues is really frightening. So what might make sense to make a better search is really scary in the context of education, because instead of a window on the world, the web is already becoming a mirror. And if you're feeding back to me what I know, what my friends know, what I've previously inquired about, and those are the boundaries of the information you're providing, you're really not giving me an opportunity to expand or to learn or to discover. Really frightening. An example, if you and 3 of your friends put in the exact same word into Google, you will get different search results. We use the word Egypt. Okay, one group got, guess what? There was an Arab Spring. Makes a lot of sense, right? The other group, totally travel information. Couldn't have proven there was an Arab Spring if your life depended on it. And why? Because Google's profiling is dictating the way that results are being presented to all of us. And it's on an ongoing basis. It's really amazing. It's almost impossible to turn this stuff off, too, although you can go very, very deep into Google and turn off a bunch of these sort of filters. But you need to be a rocket scientist to do that. We may have some here. Okay, so that's number 1, hyper-personalization. This intense amount of personal information. Number 2, this idea that we now know so much about the effectiveness of marketing that it's a different game. It permits all kinds of new testing, all kinds of new access, all kinds of new systems of communication. There was this guy named John Wanamaker who was a merchant, and his famous quote is, "Half of my advertising is wasted, I just don't know which half." Okay? So today, really nothing should be wasted. And here's something to think about. We think the web is about immediacy or low cost. It's really not. The web is changing the world because it's permitting degrees of measurement and accountability of every kind of business, of every kind of person, of every educator, as we'll see more and more throughout education. It's permitting measurement and accountability, and that's what's changing the world. And we never knew that it was possible to even have populations like this, where easily on a given day, if Zynga launches a new game, 1 month later they can have 100 million people using it. And think of the cost of aggregating these kinds of populations. Those are all now available because somebody else paid the freight for that kind of aggregation. Twitter is just a really good example. People think that it's sort of trivial. It turns out to be an unbelievably important measurement of sentiment and emotion and activity on the web. And it's going on between and among everybody that's relevant to you, whatever you're doing, whether it's customers, clients, employees, partners. HP did one of these. It's very clear now that, and this is really bad news for Roger Ebert, but it's very clear that on a Friday night, the Twitterverse is much more instructive in terms of the success prospects of a movie than any of the critics and all of the critics combined. This was an interesting process that was done when the iPhone was being expanded to Verizon. Everybody was concerned about what is that going to mean for consumers. And so instead of sort of randomly guessing and doing advertising, this was a test where they went in and they looked at all of the Twitter conversations going on about this issue. And they discovered that here's a whole group of people who were planning to stay with AT&T. They must be brain dead. Here's a group that are planning to switch to Verizon, and here's the group on the fence. Okay? Now, here's what's amazing. Today, that means that you don't spend a third of your budget on the people who are fat and happy and a third on the people that have already decided for the bad guys. You go 100% of the focus on the people who are on the fence. And so it's that kind of particularization and targeting that the web is now making available. We can tell the mood of the country. We can go in and tell who likes us, who hates us, and who's undecided. This is the famous Casey Stengel. He said the job of a baseball manager is to keep the people who hate you away from the ones who haven't made up their mind. But we can go into these channels and find out who the drivers are, who the influencers are, what kinds of conversations are going on, what tools they're using. All of this is now available. So the way we spend money and the way these markets operate is changing. These are people that are doing, PopTip is a group that is doing real-time surveys in Twitter about any issues you could imagine. And we're seeing more and more of these companies. Weigh In is another one. I guess no pun intended, but what they're doing is constructing real-time conversations on just about anything you could imagine, and that's driving information that's available today, as opposed to hiring a marketing firm that'll say in 90 days we'll give you a good idea of what's going on. This is the speed with which the web is changing the way businesses operate. This is Twist Story. Now, I don't recommend you spend any time on the Twist Story site if you have a life, but if you don't, this is a pretty interesting and compelling thing. Twist Story goes out on the web, and you pick a word, and it feeds you every single tweet in the universe that uses that word, okay? And you can't turn it off once you start watching this goofy stuff, let me just say. But it's also amazing because this could be your company name, this could be a scientific topic you're interested in, this could be any number of different things. And this is the kind of data flow and information that's now available through the web. And the next phase of that is the metrics, is how important it is that we can now create a funnel where we can take impressions and activities and we can convert those into actual dollars. And we can tell you that if you spend 2x, that you will sell more of these kinds of products and things. And so there's a degree of precision and predictability that's really very substantial. Within the social world, we can measure everything that's going on in terms of social conversations. There's a lot of new tools. And the amazing thing is virtually all of these tools are free. So if you want to try to learn about what's going on, some of these are very easy, very accessible, and very straightforward. Number 3 is this idea that we're all tethered, that we are constantly now connected, and how that is going to change so much of our world in so many ways. And we call this smart reach, and this is what I said to you before about this idea of the relevant content at the right time is really the name of the game. If you can do that, if you can deliver that information, then you've created a real valuable service. We're headed toward the Internet of Things. It's not enough that we talk to each other. We're now talking to our toasters and our coffee makers and all these things. And that's coming, and it's coming because not only is connectivity here to stay, but the technology continues to improve. The most recent announcement was just this week that Intel has finally created a totally digital Wi-Fi chip. And that was the only reason that cell phones were even any size at all, as opposed to like implants in your ear or something like that. It was because there were a few parts that were still analog, and now those are all gone. And so this is going to permit devices to communicate in astonishing ways. And frankly, any device that has any intelligence at all will now be connected to the web and accessible in a lot of new and very interesting ways. This is a fun thing. This is Twine. And Twine is a smart sensor. And what you can do with, and that's about the size of it. That's compared to a pencil. What you can do with this is, for example, my favorite one is you throw it in the dryer with your clothes. Okay? Now, you could sit around and wait till your clothes were dry, but if you turn on Twine and you tell it that when the motion stops to send your phone a signal, that's what it will do. It'll also read temperature. It'll read any number of measurable kinds of things. And so it permits new ways of aggregating information, new ways of observing things, all based on this connectivity that we now have and this ability of miniaturization that's going on. So it's going to be omnipresent. It's going to be continual. It's going to grow. Your phone really shouldn't be called a phone. It should be called a mobile tracker, okay? Because it happens to make calls, but that's not really the value, okay? And in Israel, there's a company now that has combined cell phone data with cellular data. And so what they can do is tell you the movements of crowds. There won't be anybody guessing anymore about the Million Man March. We'll know exactly how many people went. This is the sort of three views. Upper left is daytime in Prague. Upper right is nighttime in Prague. And the bottom tells us the concentration of tourists based on their cell phones. And so this kind of information is spawning all kinds of new businesses. This is my favorite. It's called See Move. How many people have moved here? Okay, right? So you give your precious possessions to guys with no teeth, and you hope that in 3 or 4 days you'll see them again. This is a little box that they tell you to give to the movers along with your other stuff, and in it is a tracking device, and it feeds back to your phone where that load is through the entire move. Okay? How cool is that, right? I mean, so that's just an example, very low-hanging fruit, but highly desirable in terms of consumers. So new businesses being created all the time doing sort of interesting things. The phone is exploding, obviously. We're seeing more and more adoption. And everything that we used to think about as fixed is now out there in a mobile sense. So we call it motional. And what it means is, what do we need? And we need to never forget anything. And of course, now our phone permits that. When do we need it? We need it right away in real time. That's what high velocity computing is permitting, wherever we are and without asking. So much more of this is going to be passively delivered to us in really critical ways. Google Now is the sort of the next step of Google trying to get back in the game. So it supplies all kinds of information based on your location, based on your activity. It knows in the morning that you want travel information and weather information. It knows in the afternoon you want sports information. And this is based obviously on your own profiles, but they're taking all that information and making it that much more powerful. Our phones will translate signs in foreign countries. Our phones will give us information. This is the new Nokia Lens, which you pan and it tells you all about the different businesses that are in your view. We'll do facial recognition in real time now. This is the Google Glass implementation. So you're walking up to somebody, it's already telling you it's his birthday, his dog died. You know, you can be very, very social. And they use this, of all places, in New York Fashion Week. A lot of the models were walking around this last week, capturing video, but also information about what was going on. At the L stations, now you'll shop for groceries using your phone. So these are displays that permit you to shop for your groceries, and it'll be sent to your home. You'll order your Starbucks coffee on the window. You'll react to screens in new ways, new gestures. This is something we just implemented for Swedish Covenant. For a zillion years, if the surgeon needed to check the patient's x-rays or records, they had to leave the surgical suite. It's astonishingly stupid, okay? This is a gesture-driven, connect machine kind of thing that lets the guy with his hands, still sterile, still in the suite, look through the patient's x-rays or records and get all of that information without ever interrupting the operating procedures. Why? I mean, it's really interesting because that's a case of technology that people think is sort of a game toy technology that has substantial real-world value in real-world cases. This is another example of that same interface. Basically, what's going on here is 24/7, simply using her web camera, which is on any laptop or any phone. She's actually using her gestures to shop. So she can interact securely with these kinds of systems. And we're going to just see more and more of that. We're working to deliver sort of geo-fenced offerings now, where based on where you are, we'll make an offer to you. This is a shoe this is designed to keep the kids from smashing the doors down of the shoe stores when a new Nike shoe comes out. Okay, so what this is that at exactly noon in Washington Square in New York, the shoe appears on your phone, and the first 400 people who buy it on their phone get it. So there's no place that they could sort of run and crash and everything else. They just have to be really quick on their phone. But this same kind of geo-fence stuff permits you to do in-mall offerings. For the convention, we actually, or you can buy things at the games. For the convention, we did a project with Coke where as they were taking pictures of their friends and delegates and stuff, it's stuck in the polar bears as well, and then they could immediately tweet this or send it to Facebook or what have you. This is another thing. Going forward, all of this stuff will be sort of hypermobile, so that you'll see clothing, you'll see other kinds of opportunities to do all of this stuff as well. Your phones are also aware now of who's around you, your friends, the people that you want to communicate with. It can provide you amazing amounts of information. Many of these companies, this is an example of what I mentioned to you before, are being acquired by Facebook. Almost the second that they pop up and start to have some traction, lo and behold, Facebook comes along and buys them, in part for the talent, almost never for necessarily for the technology. This is a whole new thing that you're going to see a lot more of because of this idea of focusing on location-based information. Nudge commerce, suggestive selling, things that know where you are and tell you. My favorite example here is you're at Home Depot. There's 5 things you need to get to fix the toilet at home. You remember 3 of them, right? You get home, you come back for the second 2 parts, all right? This idea, a lot of this stuff now, the registers, the phones, the systems, the shopping carts will all know sort of what the common offerings are, and they'll be able to make you a much smarter shopper in real time in a passive sense. We'll be able to rent cars from not Hertz or Avis, but from anybody around us, find parking spaces, find travel instructions, crowdsourced information, all of that. And that's the beginning, because the real value is not necessarily the content, it's the connection and the data that comes from that. So this is a project for McDonald's to get rid of all these sort of stupid plastic things. What we've built is a system where they can download a song directly to their phone. It's cheaper, there's no inventory, there's no distribution. That now connects that mobile consumer to a system that permits couponing and tracking. It tells you where your consumers came from and went. And so the idea of that is now can be extended as well to stadiums, where instead of hoping that the yellow Dorito wins the race, you can use your phone to vote. You can vote on the ref's call. This is a really pivotal one when your mom, you get to vote on the encore, so when your mom drags you out before, to beat the parking crowd, and you don't get to buy the $42 T-shirt, which is the only reason that she's touring anyway. When you get home, you get a video from her that says, now you can buy this right online from me, and you can get a discount because you were such a faithful fan. Why is so much of this important? Because nobody is using email, and it's falling off at a shocking rate. Everything is about text. Text is even impacting, forget landline use, it's even impacting cell phone use. It's starting to come down. Everything is text-driven in a lot of different things. I mean, the largest theory of why the kids aren't answering the phones is it might be their parents calling. So, but texting is coming back, and it's really interesting. In our school, where we do a lot of game design, one of the things that's become increasingly clear is that the tablets, which are coming force, are a lot stupider than the consoles and the PlayStations and things like that. So we actually are. It's less challenging, but challenging in different ways to build games for these new, less sophisticated devices. But those devices are the form factor that these mobile consumers are going to be using. We call that best available screen. You have to build content now across an entire spectrum. And we're seeing the tablets accelerating in terms of adoption. Major corporations, it's probably even higher than this. Almost every Fortune 500 company is now deploying, testing iPads. We're seeing another thing, which is that during the day we use our phones, but in the evening we put the phones away and we move to the tablets. So the tablets are really the second screen. And we're seeing something on the order of 40% of people are doing this, which is while they're watching TV, they're interacting with a second device, sometimes to provide supplementary information, sometimes completely unrelated. And then I mentioned before WikiWork, the idea that we can recapture all this productivity by distributing work. This is the current projection that an astonishing number of people, as a product of the economy, as a product of everything that's going on, are going to be free agents. And so we're seeing all kinds of services that permit you to put out tasks, put out projects, put out charitable things, put out design requests, and all of these are crowdsourced systems that permit people in the hundreds to make you offers and to send you products and things like that. Indiegogo is one that we work with. And you've all seen some of these things. You launch one of these campaigns and, zillions of people. If you look at this is some bus driver who was bullied. $700,000 was raised in a ridiculously short period of time from 30,000 people in 84, countries and something. This is really amazing, and this is before the Jobs Act, which come, sort of February of 2013, will now permit small businesses to raise $1 million or $2 million using this kind of crowdfunding approaches. This is a game where they were shooting for 400,000 and raised 2 million, and then ultimately now it's about 3.3 million. This is the league leader so far. It's a watch. They hope to raise $100,000. They raised $10 million. It's almost inconceivable that this is going on, but this is the law of large numbers. Quirky is a service that you pitch a product to, and then the crowd votes on whether they think that's a worthwhile product. They've grown amazingly quickly. They've launched over 200 products, got about $20 million in annual revenue. They're selling these products that they do build to major corporations. It's a very exciting thing. And then lastly, new behavior drivers. When at Kellogg for many, many years, we used to say that you don't have a real business if it doesn't save me time or money or make me more productive. Those were sort of the gating factors. And we didn't know that there was actually a fourth criteria, which was equally important. And that turned out to be this new currency of status. Okay? We always knew that status mattered, but we didn't know before the web and this hyper-connectivity and personalization, we didn't know that we could measure status, that we could confer status, and that we could publish it and distribute it. And lo and behold, this is a gigantic behavior changer. And when we talk about the badgification of the web, what we're saying is there are new ways. We're just doing a project for Amway, and it turns out that even money maxes out, but status doesn't max out. And so after your people have sold all the Amway bug lotion that they could possibly sell, if they know that their neighbor is, beating them by 14 points, they're going to go sell 3 more bottles of that stuff to somebody. Okay, and that's the world we live in. We keep score. We hate to be at the bottom of the list, and all of these things are drivers that take advantage of that. Clout is one of these services that tracks your influence across populations, and is now going the next step of saying, why would you spend money randomly if you know that here's some concrete influencers? Let's give them financial incentives to promote our products, to take test drives, to do all of these different things. And so the higher your score, the more you get off on these different kinds of coupons and opportunities. And it's doing the right thing. It's saying, who has the megaphones? We're trying to get a message out there. Let's go to the people that have this kind of influence. Badges, rewards, all of these things. The fuel band is another one. They're sort of driving and changing behavior in very interesting ways. It turns out that just basically, I'm going to fire through this, but that F-commerce, this idea that Facebook has developed its own commerce, is another really interesting and game-changing thing. Pavement is a company that builds Facebook stores. And to give you some idea, they're adding about 1,500 stores a week. They have almost 200,000 stores on Facebook using this currency. And why? Well, this is Walmart, okay? And an interesting thing about Walmart is that every one of the 8,500 Walmart stores has an individual Facebook page. And the reason is because commerce is local and because they have determined that it's important for them to connect to their communities in really significant ways. And so that's what we're seeing in terms of these currencies. And then this idea of games is important, but it's not important today because of games and because of the volume of users. And it's not really even that important that it turns out it's not the kids. It turns out it's grown-ups who are playing games, and that they're highly desirable, affluent grown-ups. Stay-at-home moms are the largest growing population in terms of that. And they actually exceed 17-year-old and younger boys. I mean, it's really one of these factoids that it's hard to argue with. But what's so significant about games, this is sort of a sad commentary, there's 80 million virtual farmers in Farmville and only 1.3 million real farmers. And I think the virtual farmers are making a better living too. But here's what we learned from games. And this impacts every kind of business, every kind of product, every kind of service. It's that it's clear that every single user, every single consumer is now empowered and able to make three calculations. What is this interaction worth to me in dollars? How committed am I to it? And what is the value of this thing? So what that means is that instead of sort of a standard target, I'm going to sell you this product for this price, we're in a new world. And if you do this right, you actually expand the population and the economic opportunity. You're not trying to guess whether $59.99 is the exact right price for a product and then you discount it. What you do is offer your product in different versions across the spectrum of users who are crazy about it and users who are relatively indifferent, and this broad sort of bell curve group in the middle. And if you do that, you actually grow the pie. But what that means is that there is not going to be a fixed price of consumption for virtually anything. We're going to have it be variable in real time based on what the individual consumer's connection and relationship to these things is. And that's what's going to, again, be driven by connectivity, location-driven, nudge commerce, and this idea of high-velocity computing. And so lastly, just briefly, social media is here to stay. It's going to get actually narrower. It's already overwhelming for all of us. We didn't want those friends to begin with, but it's hard to get rid of them. It's going to be niche-based. It will be sort of everywhere. And you're going to see new sort of verticals. So Built in Chicago is one sort of a B2B digital network system. Next Door is a system that lets you define a neighborhood. And this is really interesting in some of these New York high-rises where nobody knows the people in their own building. These kinds of systems are shrinking the web to permit you to get access to people who are immediately sort of proximate. So they've built about 3,600 networks in neighborhoods so far. It's really an interesting tool. And then lastly, Pair is a network of two. It lets you actually just talk to one person. So, these kinds of tools are almost like two-way radios, but they're intended to deal with the fact that there's so much clutter now, even in these social networks, that it's going to have to change to become valuable. And this is just what's going on. I mean, I like to tell this to everybody. I mean, it's critical that you participate in this world in whatever business or situation you're in. It's critical that you not overdo it or try to do it inauthentically, because that's doomed. But if you do it right and you find the people who want to do it, it's a very, very powerful tool, and it's a very important aspect of where we're going for the next umpteen years. So, thank you very much. So, sure. Are we on time? Carrie, are we in pretty good shape time-wise? Okay, great. Yes?
Yeah, on this crowdfunding, can you address, it seems like there would be a conflict between trying to protect your intellectual property, especially at the germination stage, versus getting funding from the community?
Right.
Can you address what people are doing?
Well, so there's two different parts of that. The first part is that if you're doing a socially driven project or you're doing something that is a product, then those people aren't buying an interest in your IP. They're simply buying at some future date an opportunity to acquire that product or to get certain perks or to participate in the adventure. The ones that are coming down the pike, which are real investments, are going to be securities. And those securities will be, it's the same as any current investment. I mean, you'll have to negotiate with and disclose in the terms of service, actually. You'll have to disclose that those people don't actually own anything. And don't have any right to the intellectual property. They're simply investors. But we'll see what happens. I mean, it is a whole new idea that people with a good idea simply don't have to go to any of the gatekeepers. And what I think is so astonishing is, this is about the third year where any small business would tell you that there are no banks lending any money to anybody, much less small businesses. And so the idea that you can go out on the web and raise $250,000 in a week, if you have a good story and a good pitch, is pretty astonishing, and it's going to put a lot of new kinds of pressures on banks and on these other kind of financial channels and things like that. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, with regard to device-to-device communication,
Yeah.
The Internet of Things.
Yeah.
But really, with regard to all these technologies, how do you see the boundaries between, let's call it the corporate for-profit sphere, the social entrepreneurial sphere, or the nonprofit, and government? If you can
Well,
those three pieces, how do you see those things those boundaries shifting?
I don't think that they're going to be shifted as a product of technology. I mean, I think that privacy is going to be an issue. It's the same kind of issue. The technology will change. It'll be different. But I mean, we still have to pray that, God forbid, Congress doesn't try to do something about it, because that's probably a worse outcome. But I don't think that the technology is going to drive a change in those relationships. I just think that we're doing more and more to try and use these tools as an example to streamline government, because government is doomed if you don't. And one of the ways is we're building systems that permit a lot of responses to be based on, if you saw that mass customization video idea, well, you can use that to respond to consumers in a very effective, very low-cost way. And when you look at inquiries in any business across any governmental agency, it's the 90-10 rule. 90% of them are redundant and repetitive. And if you can make simple videos in multilingual fashions that are available with happy people making those explanations, as opposed to waiting 20 minutes on the phone to get somebody who's harassed anyway, not only do you make it a better consumer experience, but those people who have the day jobs can actually do productive work. They're not answering the phone and saying, well, our hours are 9 to 5 for the 10 millionth time that month. So technology, is going to be a solution in education and government and all these kinds of areas if it's used right. But it turns out almost all these technologies have sort of the ugly secret is the technology is just the tool. The people still have to do the work. I mean, we have assessment tools, we have differential learning tools here, but if the faculty doesn't sit down and build the roadmaps, then they don't mean anything, if you don't put the content into these systems. So, yeah. Well, the analytics, for example, Google Analytics, I mean, Google makes it a policy to make virtually everything free, and they're still trying to figure out whether the sheer aggregation of all this data is going to be, ultimately have some tremendous, value. But these different companies have different strategies. None of them has a particular revenue model. Usually what happens, and there was a slide, let me just see if I can find it for you very quickly. Basically, this slide was intended to sort of talk about that. So the idea of freemiums is basically what these people live and die on. And so freemiums mean that you figure out ways to change your offering so that it's sort of an early bite, a lost leader, whatever you want to call it, and then you limit it so as power users come along, they understand that it's valuable to their business, and then they become sort of committed to paying real money. And so almost all these places have these circumscribed offerings that you can do everything, and then you go to save it, and you discover you can't save it, right? It's like, So that's the idea, is to give you a taste of the tool, and then to call it. Yeah, one more? Carrie? One more question? Anybody? Yes? Well, I'm not sure which ones you haven't heard of. I mean, have you heard of this thing called the Internet? Okay, so you know about the Internet. Okay, and Facebook and text. Well, look, some of these are B2B tools. I mean, I understand that, but the idea that you haven't heard about it just means you don't happen to know the name of the enterprise, because the idea that your phone will tell you that your friends are proximate or the idea that your phone will be smart enough to know where you are and things will happen as a result of that. You don't need to know who's providing or who's doing those things to be a beneficiary of that information flow of those services. So it's not, it sneaks up on all of us. I mean, it's going to be a situation where all of these kinds of opportunities are just going to start to appear, and because we're lazy and because it makes some sense, we're going to be happy to do that. I mean, this filter issue on search is very problematic. On the one hand, who wants to have 22 million responses? You really do want them to do some work to help make it clear that these are real responses from real people, or that these are real pieces of data. But on the other hand, who keeps score and who gets to decide whether, in a certain instance, you may be more interested in going broad rather than going very narrow. So all of that really puts the onus on us to be smart consumers and to take the time to really understand these tools. And what's so frightening is we really don't understand how much of this stuff is changing that we sort of take for granted. So, okay, we're done? Okay. Yeah.